Hi, welcome to More Than Somm. My name is Kat Thomas, and we are still in our Down Under series where we are traveling through the great country of Australia. Yes, the land down under. And there's so many reasons why you should fall in love with this country as much as I do, as much as all of the people that have been on this series so far have. And if you haven't watched through the first 3 episodes, I encourage you to do so. Special shout out to Vanya Cullen, Jane Ferrari, and Tim Wildman. And this week we've got a very special and fabulously just amazing human, Mr. Mark Davidson, joining us in just a few moments. I'm not going to dive too far into it just yet because he works in a very unique, mysterious, mindful way of threes. So I'll just give you 3 little snippets about him. Not only is he the education director for Wines Australia Americas, he's a loving and doting father and husband, and he has his WSET diploma. We're going to find out a few more sets of threes when we jump into More Than Somm Down Under series with Mark Davidson. I want to shout out to Sommation Live and Core Body Mind for giving me a platform to share the love of Australia with you all. I'll see you in just a minute. A quote that I read that I just loved, and especially in this time and sort of moments that we're in, you need to live it and feel it, not just read and write about it. You have been dubbed an Australian wine visionary, so...
Wow.
Yes.
Where that came from. Someone must have been drinking at the time.
That is from Mr. Dylan of Bindi Wines.
Oh, wow. And then that, I will happily absorb that compliment from a man of his stature. Wow, yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
So Mark Davidson is the head of education and development for the Americas for Wine Australia. You've been doing that for 12 years now, right?
Yeah, it's actually been a role that's evolved a little bit over time. I actually was doing a global role for Wine Australia, so I was traveling around the world doing what I'm doing now. But that was when I was a period of time when I was single and shaking and moving. Now I'm not. I'm just shaking. I'm just not moving as much.
You have your WSET diploma, which is great.
Yep. Yeah, I've always been into wine study. I've also taught many programs because I had the APP for WSET in Vancouver. I had my own wine school in Vancouver for a long time. So yeah, love WSET.
You are a loving father and husband, right? Yep. So that's a big hit.
I am. That is a big hit.
Yes. And not a hit yet, but you're writing a book. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I am. I've been roped into doing the Wines of Australia through the Classic Wine Library, and that was initiated by my friend James Tidwell, who said, "Hey, I've put your name forward." And
pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
And I picked that. Really?
Which is interesting because my first job was at a pancake restaurant.
That's why I thought I threw.
But if I can have a good waffle, and I have a waffle maker at home, I'm having waffles.
Bed made or the bed left undone?
I am an expert at leaving the bed undone, but I do like the bed made, although it's usually not me that's making it.
If you were a record album, what would you look like?
Oh, it would be one of the Led Zeppelin albums, probably Led Zeppelin 2.
And let's start with the demon number 1. What is your take on that? I think I have a great quote here. It just makes me giggle even before I say it. I will not tolerate the bullshit excuses for plain old shitty wine. Of some of the things that we can talk about with the evolution and revolution of wine in Australia.
Sure. I was lucky. I grew up in an era where we were inundated with classics in the trade. You were inundated. You went to Grand Cru Burgundy tastings. Now, I know that exists in some parts of the US, like in New York and other places, Vegas probably. But for the most part, young somms nowadays don't get to see that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that is the pinnacle of everything, but in those days, it set standards for us. First growth Bordeaux. I mean, Mondavi used to do tastings where he compared his wines to the first growths. And you went to these tastings and you're like, wow, that's kind of cool. So I grew up on a steady diet of classics. Then I ended up working at a bistro in Toronto, where I got to work with all these funky, small production, small little wines in from obscure appellations. I was pouring Côte de Frontenac by the glass back in the 80s and stuff. So we were working with some cool stuff. Then the natural wine movement came along, and I balked initially, coming from a classics background. But then I'm also constantly mindful of the fact that, hey, I don't want to be that grumpy old wine guy, because things change, things evolve, and let's look into it. And it was actually an Australian natural wine that shifted my perceptions, and I forced myself to think differently, and really started to enjoy and really appreciate what's going on with the natural wine movement. And I don't like the term, but that's another story. That's for another debate. But what I appreciate about it, and I'll get into what I think's bullshit, because I think there is some. I think what's great about it in the big picture is making small and large wineries alike go, okay, what are we doing with our practices here? And we've been really adamant from, food, be it, Whole Foods, the whole emergence of like what's in our food. And we've never had to divulge that with wine. And I think it's really important that people know that it's not just grapes, gently crushed by feet somewhere and that's it. It makes itself in the corner. There's some additives that are probably not necessary and probably not very good for wine. But so I think that's been a really nice movement, but it's like anything. You have to have something way over here on the extreme to draw attention to a subject, and then that brings people over. I just struggle with the extreme. So the next evolution, which I think is awesome, because you're seeing this in clear view in Australia, and especially in the basket range, the great producers there, it's low intervention. It's just, it's as natural as you can get anywhere, but it's with thought, and it's not this idea that, I just pick it and it creates and makes itself in the corner here. Wine doesn't make itself in the corner. It requires a little management. Grapevines don't grow the way we are asking them to grow. They are woodland climbers. They would go straight up a tree. We are forcing them to grow in a way that they are. So there's intervention, and I have no issue with that. I think the bullshit excuses that with that quote comes from is absolutely true. I think there's no excuse for it, because to my mind, great wine and interesting wine does speak of the variety, more varieties involved, and somewhere there's that somewhereness. Is this delicious first and foremost? That's wine's primary job. It needs to be delicious. It's totally, and his wines are just, I think he's made people brave about Grenache, and we'll get to that later, because I think he's great. And then there's Gareth Belton, and there's other people up there, gentlefolk, rainbow juice from gentlefolk. Hello, sign me up and gargle that stuff down till I'm blue in the face.
The variety Grenache. I want to give Grenache its due time and presence, because it's one of those really fiercely fabulous grapes that I think has been put on the back burner for a lot of years by people, no matter where it comes from. And I know you and I've at least rambled to you that I just fell in love with Grenache when I was in Australia, and I'll kind of let you take it away why that might have happened for me.
I think it's one of those varieties. It's a very historic variety. It's widely planted. It loves warmth, and it loves to be out in the sunshine. Yet, for some weird reason, it's been sitting in the shade. In terms of our own perception of it, it's like the blue collar worker. Being able to look at single varietal Grenache and say, okay, well, what have we got here? And I see strange parallels in other parts of the world where people start to look at some of those varieties that have been there for a while. I mean, I think of Nerello Mascalese in Sicily. You think of Nera d'Avola and all those things. Where it's like, actually, if we start paying attention to this, do better things in the vineyard with it, we can actually shape something of character and interest. And I think what has happened with Grenache is that it's sat into this box over here. You use it for blending. It ripens really easily, but if you manage that ripeness, pick it a little early, do some good things in the vineyard, pick it with some precision and some tannin and some acidity, because that's stuff that can disappear quickly in Grenache. And then treat it sort of, you look at the practices now, there's a bit of Pinot stuff going on with it, right? Whole cluster. The only thing I'd say, that people are, cold soaks, whole cluster, and a few, whole cluster or whole bunch, stems being added back in afterwards, for a bit more sort of grip and structure. And I think that what's being captured now is a much broader spectrum of what Grenache is capable of, from sort of perfumed and ethereal on this side. I mean, really, really light Grenache is probably not that easy to achieve, but light to medium bodied and perfumed through to full bodied and tannic and quite structured is feasible. But in the same way that I see Pinot that's deep, dark, and concentrated and dark looking, I feel suspicious, and I feel that way about Grenache when I see really dark, really concentrated Grenache. I go, okay, something's not quite right here, because it's a thin-skinned variety, and you see this lovely spectrum with Grenache, and I'm super excited about it. I remember, legit, it was Taris at Ochota Barrels. I didn't know anything about him. I was in Sydney. A friend of mine said he worked for one. So you got to try this. It's like 10 years ago, probably. Tried this. I said, what the hell is this? And who is this? And I need more of this. And because it was so beautiful. And then you meet him, and you, not man, woman, or animal, you fall in love with him because he's just this amazing guy, and he's philosophically spot on. I don't always like every wine he makes, but that the Fugazi Grenache is an absolute mind bender.
So now for our third, one of your other mindful threes, let's talk about Tasmania, the Tassie love. But actually, it's got more in common with the climate of Champagne.
There you go. Some warm patch. I mean, it's an interesting island in the fact you're absolutely right. It's right off the southern coast of Australia, like next stop Antarctica. And the prevailing environment is Southern Ocean. It's called the Southern Ocean. It's like, hey, next stop Penguin City. You know, I think it's a super exciting place because it's had, viticulture dates back to the 1800s there, but it's like anything, it wasn't really that well populated. Cool climate viticulture is hard work. It's much harder than some of the other colonies that we're developing. So it takes time to sort of manage and decide what does well there. And I think the cool thing about, no pun intended, the cool thing about Tasmania is that everyone's excited about what's possible there. And it is pristine. It's like the west coast of Australia, or I'm trying to think of New Zealand. Okay, I've said it. I said the word New Zealand. But all the rain systems are coming from the west, the purest water and breezes and air. There's no land masses that it's coming across. It's just pure ocean. So there's a freshness and vibrancy and clarity to, I feel like, to the air there, which I believe, you can't directly translate that to the wines, but I feel like that exists. There's a purity and clarity that I think is magic from Tasmania. And it's not just, there's so many cool things happening there. I remember one of the first trips, one of the guys said, well, we're going to take your guys to a distillery. There's a whiskey distillery. And I thought, oh, really? It's going to be really shitty. And it's some of the best whiskey I've had. And all the guys were like clamoring, because I knew nothing about it. It goes to show. But there's peat bogs, natural peat bogs in Tasmania, akin to what goes on in different kind of character and flavor. But there's real peat bogs and unbelievably pristine spring-fed water that people use in the Lark's distillery in the center of Hobart. Magic, spot on, as good a whiskey as you'll get. It's like world-class stuff. So there's that element, and there's the beauty, the weird Tasmanian devils, and sparkling wine. What else do you want?
Thank you for sharing your energy, your passion, your mindfulness of threes. That is a good way to kind of fulfill the circle of things, of thought. And I know that everybody else out there is going to appreciate what you shared as well. So,
well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Enjoy your day.
Absolute pleasure. See you soon.
Bye. Bye. Thank you all so much for joining us in this series episode of More Than Somm Down Under with Mark Davidson. I'm glowing and happy and elevated in my mood. That's what Mark Davidson is all about. And I'm glad that you're able to share in the experience with us. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions. I'm going to be posting Mark's social media handles if you want to go bug him about a few things. Also, the Wine Australia website, and there's a free educational course website that I'll be posting on Wines Australia as well. A special shout out to Summation Live and Core Body Mind for the platform to share and experience all this with you. I'll see you next week on More Than Somm Down Under.